So here you are.
Yeah, and it's not sufficient. At least I'm happy, baseline, that the Honorable Minister of Finance, and also with his background from CSOs, I'm sure he can resonate with the sentiments at the base level. But I've been wondering whether this apology is a government position, a party position, or an individual position.
You know, it's actually not his first. When he was delivering the statement before Parliament,
yes,
he says something close to an apology for the hardship.
Yes. That's what I'm asking, whether it's an individual thing. Is it a government position, a party position that has gone through and is manifesting across the board? Would this apology have been made if 2024 election wasn't in sight? What is the end game? Is it really to sympathize with Ghanaians, or probably to the extent that if it is offered, it will inure to their political pursuit or whatever? But it doesn't take away the fact that so much hardship, I admit that level of acknowledgement, but so much hardship has been imposed on Ghanaians, which clearly could have been avoided. I'm saying that could have been avoided because from the third quarter of 2021, the data was clear where we're heading towards. And all that government needed to do was to take proactive steps. And that was actually what Kenya did. Okay, we didn't do that. And then if you look at the approach that government adopted in the restructuring of the domestic debt, clearly didn't have a human face and all of that. So really, Honorable Minister, yes, you have made this apology, but I want to believe that it's not enough. And the reason I said, I asked whether this was a government position. If truly this was a government position and government has reflected on this carefully, then probably this will come with certain practical steps that government would take.
On the back of what you have said, two messages. Haj Suleimana says, is the apology based on admission of faults? You have just pointed out the fault. No, I think it is political rather than sincere. Nee says, how can a genuine apology claim that the DDEP and its related international cousins are an achievement where it was recklessly caused?
Yes. And the manner in which it was done clearly takes a lot away from this humility. And to the extent that the current Minister of Finance wasn't really the architect behind this DDP and all of that, probably we can say that, well, it's good for him to say so. That is what I'm saying, that we said this long ago, that probably the president should have led by example. There were external factors, but of course, there were also pre-existing fiscal vulnerabilities that we brought upon ourselves. And look, something, if you go into the details and you see the extent to which we actually abused the COVID and the fiscal deficit that Ghana recorded in 2020, it was one of the highest in the whole of Africa. And Ghana couldn't recover from that excess, which took us to the 17th IMF supported program. But of course, we can also see a similar thing, something in 2012. The fiscal deficit we recorded in 2012, which was also an election year, and also happened during the energy sector crisis. The fiscal deficit was more than 11%. Together with the current account deficit, something Ghana couldn't recover from the 2012 election excesses, which took us to the 16th IMF supported program. So you will see that across the two main political parties, the way we manage our economy, and especially with the slightest shocks, clearly tells us that we have not been able to build sufficient resilience. And a lot of the things that we have done over the years, in the last 25 years or so, looking at the data, we have supported our economic resilience with more propaganda. So it takes shocks of this magnitude to actually reveal the reality. So I want to believe that this apology is not properly motivated. That's my considered view. And also, it should reflect a government position. It should reflect a party position.
He's a Minister of Finance, so...
Yeah, I don't think it reflects a government position. The reason I'm saying so is that if you look at even the individuals within the MPP who have been pushing for this, it's a clear case that this is something that should have been done or should be done, and we think it should be done. So they are pushing more for it, and I think that that is what I would say. And I want to believe that this doesn't... Look, if you look at more than 60% of the sufferings Ghanaians are going through right now, clearly avoidable.
Clearly avoidable.
Clearly avoidable. Clearly avoidable. You can talk, and to the extent that we have not been bold enough to admit that this was self-imposed. Of course, we had external shocks. The tendency to blame everything on external shocks clearly doesn't tell me that this apology is genuine. You can have a policy and talk about the intended consequences and the unintended consequences. I want to believe that at the time government was taking this decision, they knew what was going to happen. They knew. They knew this was going to impose considerable hardship on Ghanaians. Ghanaians also knew, to a large extent, the consequences of these actions. And therefore, there were alternatives in terms of proposals on the table. There were. Government simply failed to listen to Ghanaians. And the approach government adopted in the domestic debt exchange really clearly doesn't suggest that government really, in the immediate, they knew there were going to be hardships.
I'm surprised you are getting support. Me says clearly intended. Ratings agencies, whoever, they cried. And citizens also cried. CSOs, key indicators, were ignored and downplayed.
So let's not... Look, something. If Ghana government had reached out to the IMF in 2021, there would have been no need for domestic debt exchange. There would have been no need for debt restructuring. Because in 2021, the IMF had just concluded their Article 4 consultation with Ghana and concluded that our debt was largely sustainable, but at high risk of debt distress. High risk of debt distress necessarily doesn't lead to debt restructuring. Ghana officially entered high risk debt distress category in 2014. And we went for the IMF program from 2015 to 2019. There was no debt restructuring. It was just because government failed. And what were the bases? It was not driven by the economic fundamentals. I think it was more about pride. It was more about so many other considerations other than the common good.
Okay.
That's how I put it. And that's what resulted. And even when government, we, including myself, we had said way back, even before the president said there will be debt restructuring, but there will be no haircut. We had said way back, including the Imani group, that there is no way Ghana will be able to restore debt sustainability without restructuring its domestic debt.
Okay.
Because if you look at the burden, the domestic debt was contributing more compared to even the external debt.
Okay.
And therefore, there was no way. So it was unavoidable. But the question was, what should be the approach? There should have been clear thresholds. Dr. Edouard spoke about that clearly. Even initially, government-owned assessment, they excluded individual bondholders.
Right.
They did.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Bokpin.